a time for conversation, discussion, questions, whatever works for you. We have a little under half an hour. Yes?
Can you clarify this point you made about the highest happiness that we experience actually being that which happens when we put ourselves in service to all life? Why it is that there's that connection?
Yes, well, I don't recall making exactly that statement, but the general direction you're pointing in, I would agree with. So why is it that when we are serving all living things, we are happier than when we are thinking only of ourselves? Why would that be? What's the general principle at work here? And I want to say it's a general principle. I wouldn't say that's some kind of formula that is ultimately true or something, but there's a general principle at work here which is worth exploring. And that is, so one of the most important qualities of self is that it has some kind of boundary. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It has some kind of boundary. There are many different kinds of boundaries that it might have. And that alone is a very important fact. It's not often noticed that your sense of self changes all the time. You have the sense that this is myself. But actually, you can see yourself as this body. You can see yourself as these feelings or this mind. You can also you can look at and say, well, this community it's my community. And therefore, it's sort of part of myself. And maybe it even is myself. Maybe actually, I see the community as more myself than this individual. Lots of people look at their community or their family or their society in that way. They're willing to die. This body could die so that this larger entity may survive, may flourish. And so what the boundary might be is very changeable. It's uncertain. And in fact, you could even take yourself to be the whole universe. Yes? You could do that. But that still is a kind of a boundary. And so I want to take that as the general principle. And now with that said, you can work out many ramifications of this at your leisure. But that said, the way it usually works is that self, this is just a general principle. Don't take it too rigidly. But the way it generally works is that the sense of self is kind of like a local minimum of suffering. That's why I'm talking about this boundary. It's as if it's a local minimum. Does that make sense? Not really. Okay, so if you're looking at the shapes of things, geometry and okay, so what would be a good thing? I have a paper here. Oh, good idea. Shawl. So shawl. So right there's a local minimum. That's the minimum you can get. That's the place where you go down if you don't go up and then go down. So that means that I could pour water into this. If it were plastic or something, then it would hold the water. The water couldn't get out. It's stuck in there because water goes down. And so it's stuck there. So it's as if yourself is a local minimum of suffering.
Right.
The boundary, what the boundary of the self is if you start moving away from this, you'll suffer. So don't. And that's the threat that this self makes. Self is really something more like attachment to self. So the attachment creates a situation in which if you start breaking free, if you start moving away from this sense of self, then your suffering will increase. As long as you have certain conditions such as attachment. If there's attachment there, then your suffering will increase. Now, if you can break free of that local minimum, then the happiness and then the suffering goes down even more. But the reason I mention it is that once you start examining what it is to be enslaved to yourself, what you notice is the self actually, it doesn't seem this way, but the self actually only offers you one thing, and that is suffering. It only offers you the one thing. But it seems like it doesn't, because the suffering is set up like a wall. And as long as you're inside and you're not pushing against the walls, you feel like you're fine. You feel like you're safe. But if you start going against that, and there's attachment, then all kinds of threats start coming up in your mind. Right? Something will say, if you don't start thinking about what you're doing tomorrow, well then, and you start suffering. Let's say that your legs are in pain. You're sitting, your legs are in pain, and you're attached to the body, physical body. That's part of what you see as yourself. And then the pain makes you do certain things. Why? Because it's the local minimum of suffering. As long as I keep on doing whatever my body says and whatever my mind says, then I'm happy in this container of the body and mind. But if you get out, if you escape from body and mind, then you get out of this local minimum of suffering and discover that that was a lot of suffering, even in that local minimum. Once you do that, then you don't have attachment anymore to that local minimum. And so the whole metaphor collapses. The thing that makes this stops being the case. So the reason I bring all of it up is that when you're serving all life, that is a way of being a little bit less attached to this local minimum of suffering. So you're in your very selfish, whatever that would be, very attached to self state of mind. And you're there because it's the local minimum. But if you try to escape from it, it gets pretty bad. Nonetheless, that local minimum is still a lot of suffering. If you can relinquish that attachment to self by, for example, wanting to serve all life, then it is seen that all that was offered was suffering. So it isn't actually the case that you find happiness when you serve all beings. You just stop obstructing it.
See that you weren't actually happy at all. Suffering.
Well, it's more that the thing that the self does is obstruct happiness. It obstructs the self. It doesn't really the self. The self isn't as I like to say, you don't want to anthropomorphize the self. So it's not like it's doing stuff, but there's attachment there. That attachment obstructs fulfillment. It obstructs so suffering isn't inherent. And you could call the thing that remains when suffering is gone bliss or happiness or peace. But the thing that makes the thing that's so difficult for us to see is that the very thing that makes the suffering, this attachment, it only works when it makes a local minimum within the suffering. Because if you saw it was suffering, you'd abandon it. But it makes this local minimum within the suffering. And what happens when you find your way to attend to all beings is you're willing to go through a little bit of discomfort. You sit down, you meditate, you stop being engaged in all this stuff. You have all your tasks, and the moment you start to step away from it, this thing, oh no, you're gonna suffer, right? And so you have to suffer a little bit you have to go up your little slope, and then you're out. And that being out is the thing that is the happiness. Does that make any sense? It's a little bit complicated.
A little. Some. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. There's sense in that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I could, right now, talk to a friend and lay it all out clearly.
Yeah. Well, I didn't lay it out all that clearly either. But the most important insight is that you see that this attachment to self only offers you one thing, and that is suffering. To set that aside, therefore, if it's the case that it only offers one thing, then it's also the case that to set that aside results in happiness. That's the only direction to go in.
It's not that being altruistic is some special cultivated state in which happiness is found, but it's that being non-altruistic,
Yes.
is fundamentally just strange and particular and
Exactly. Right, that's really what I'm saying.
just not in there.
That's what I'm saying, exactly. Right. That being altruistic is natural, and so you just automatically feel as happy as you would if you didn't obstruct it constantly through attachment to self, which is a strange, as you say, particular state. And then the question is, well, then why would we do that? And the answer is that in the topology of attachment, there are local minimums. Yes?
I heard you say you're suspicious of concepts
Mhm.
as organizing principles,
Mhm.
and also later that the happiness that comes from, say, following your breath is better than happiness that comes from thinking about yourself.
There was an experiment that we did. Again, I don't know if you could say that that's always the case, but it's something to explore. Yeah.
You also told me in a private conversation that the world doesn't need new ideas, even if I learn them here.
Uh-huh.
So like many people here, I've received a lot of training on how to have concepts and words,
Yeah.
and how to read and write and speak and listen. And when I follow that training, it seems useful. It seems like I help people.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen that when I just drop that and full breath, I'm happy. When do I trust words and ideas and concepts that are in here? And when do I not trust them?
Great. So the first thing is that to say that the world doesn't need new ideas is, I don't know exactly what I said in that conversation, but to be more precise, it's something like, that isn't what the world needs most. Because the problem isn't the words or ideas. The problem is that we become attached to them. So the world needs most the ability for human beings to not be attached, which you can say in a lot of different ways. You could say that we would be willing to die. Not that you're willing to die for something, you're just willing to die. You may die for something, but in any case, you're willing to die. That would be an example of non-attachment. Human beings aren't willing to die, and so we believe that all the resources of the world should be for us, so that we can both survive and also have pleasure. So it isn't so much that if you come up with this theory that words and concepts are bad and hold to it, then that's just an example of attachment to a concept, which would cause suffering, according to this talk. So what really matters isn't so much those absolute statements, but the final question. How do you know when you can trust concepts? And what is extremely important to acknowledge is that you won't be able to come to the full answer to that question from within concepts. You will come to an approximate, or you could say conceptual, resolution. You find a certain kind of answer, which could be helpful, but it isn't the complete answer. Okay? That said, I can give you the approximate answer, and that is that when thoughts and words are conducive to compassion and understanding of the ethical consequences of actions and the relinquishment of all acquisitions, in particular self, then those thoughts and concepts and words can be trusted. Yes?
I'm confused about feelings because I used to make all of my decisions from thoughts and emotions, and then I learned how to access my intuition, and whenever it was available to me, I found that it made more trustworthy decisions, even when it was different than my thoughts and emotions. But still, intuition was a feeling, even though it was different than an emotional feeling, and sometimes led me to different decisions than my emotional feelings would. And you've taught that there's something more trustworthy than even intuitive feelings. And I've been able to access it, something like that, at sometimes when I'm able to just do something without pausing to think or even feel about it. I just do it, and somehow it's not what I ever would have thought of or felt like doing, but it is magically the best decision. But it's still rare for me to be able to be in the mind that acts in that way, and oftentimes I can't access that mind, and yet still a decision needs to be made. But then when my intuition arises, I say, oh, that's a feeling, it's not trustworthy, and then I cut it off, and then the more trustworthy thing doesn't arise. But because I cut off the intuition and it's so fragile, even that doesn't arise, and then all I have left to fall back on is just thoughts and emotions again. And so often when I need to make a decision and that happens, I don't know how to, I don't know how to move forward, because even not doing anything or even not making a decision is still making a decision, and so I feel very confused about how to help.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So yes, we have a certain kind of awareness, thoughts and emotions, another kind of awareness which you might call intuition, and then there are other kinds of awareness, maybe this direct energetic activity that's even less made up than intuition, which is even less made up than thoughts and feelings. So that's great. If you know how to do that and it happens occasionally, then that's good. The thing is that with that, like everything, including the intuition, you get better at it with practice, and until you get better at it with practice, you're not good at it. And so you have to take that into account. You have to know, well, here's a situation where I have an intuitive sense. Perhaps I should search for something even more true, but there's a risk there. It might not arise. And then I missed my chance to follow along with intuition. And so, due to compassion, I may choose to go with this less wise kind of wisdom because, as you say, you have to do something. And that compassion is more meaningful than we might think. That you would compassionately not take that risk because you don't want to put yourself or others at risk. That's a source of great clarity, because it prevents us from rushing. So the compassion simultaneously says, this kind of wisdom is really good. Maybe not that many people have access to it. You didn't used to, but now you do. You should really try to find it. But it also says, if you're not going to find it, then you have to take the fact of your action or inaction into account. That might be problematic. And so it balances everything so that the following thing can happen. And that is that we learn how. And people love this nowadays because I think we need it so much. Different people say this in different ways. The way I said it when I wrote up a piece on it, 20 years ago or something, was it takes enormous strength to go beyond what you have realized without turning away from it. It's very difficult to realize something, to realize a truth. You've realized a truth, and now you're going to go beyond it. And yet somehow you have to do that in a way that isn't untrue to it. You've realized a truth, you have to continue on. But you have to continue on in a way that isn't contrary, that isn't against that truth, that isn't you turning away from that truth. But you have to go beyond it. It takes enormous strength to be able to do this. So a lot of the time when we talk about cut it off or throw it away, there's the sense of, well, here I am in a bad place, and now I'm in a good place, and the teaching, go to an even better place, is understood to be go back to the bad place. So I know it sounds crazy, but almost everyone here in this room, certainly me, has spent a lot of time on this strategy. So you're in a very negative state of mind, you return to a positive state of mind. Some teacher says, go even further, and you say, oh no, this isn't working. So you go back to the negative state of mind. It's an enormous challenge to get to a certain kind of clarity and then spend enough time there so that you're agile enough there to discover how from there to take the next step forward. From there, go beyond it. Rather than feeling like, well, this isn't good enough, I have to go somewhere, and the only place I know to go is back, because I know how to get there anyway. And so you just go there and hope that's progress. But it isn't. It's really hard. You get to the point, and you can just barely sustain a certain wisdom. So then you just have to spend time barely sustaining this wisdom and learning how to, okay, I can sustain this wisdom unless something difficult happens, and then I lose it. Okay, well, now I can sustain it. All right, I've got it. Now I can kind of dance in it. And now I don't know what's that way. I know what's that way. I came from there. I know how to get back to that negative state of mind. But what about that way? I have no idea. And so then from there, that truth, see, the truth in your realization, you actually don't have to turn away from at all. You only turn away from the deception in it. But the problem is that when we're there, we can't tell the difference. So we have to spend time there. And the compassion is the thing that both asks us to stay there without rushing and also draws us on to the next, even clearer realization. Does that make sense? Yes.
Okay. So you mentioned that cultivating your mind and reaching enlightenment is fulfilling your purpose in life. But you also said that, but there is something more. Like there is, that's almost all of it. But there is the bit that you have to do.
The bit that you have to do?
Or you didn't say that, but I'm I assumed after you cultivate your mind, okay, the world is still in the state it is in, right? People are.
Is that true?
I mean, you can perceive it differently.
Uh-huh.
However, objectively speaking, more animals are getting killed, or things are still bad. Like even if you cultivate your mind, kind of.
It's a risky proposition you're making. I'm not disagreeing with any part of it, but it's risky.
Okay.
Yes.
So you can view it differently, in your head and your body, but still people do not have the enlightenment that you had, right? So they are still.
They didn't?
We are getting, let's say, enlightened right now. Oh, sorry. But I'm just wondering, what about the people out there that are not? They are still doing the things.
Okay, so first of all, just be careful. You're saying a lot of stuff. and you have to look really closely at the propositions and the assumptions. But I'll go with this anyway.
But I still, the point that I was wondering about.
Yes.
So after you cultivated your mind.
Yeah.
And hopefully reached that point of enlightenment, what is the thing that you do? That's a lot of effort. That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's true.
It's a lot. A lot of people never get there.
Right.
But once you do, what do you do out there?
Out there means in the world?
Yeah.
Means in society?
Yeah. In a way, that's what I mean.
Well, you take everyone through the same process. Right? What else would you do?
That's why I'm at. I don't think it's gonna lead to the change that you are hoping for.
What wouldn't?
I just think we need there is something missing.
What?
Beyond the concept of enlightenment, we need to perhaps activate it with the same amount of effort capitalistic forces and materialism is acting in creating, as you said, these companies or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
So we need a counterforce.
Right.
Something that is beyond the I don't want to say an idea, because it's manifested in real life too when we're getting towards that purpose. But I'm saying enlightenment should be almost a first step towards changing the world.
Sure, of course.
But then that process of doing this, it will seek even more discomfort than the discomfort we're having here in the Zen.
Right.
So that's what I was wondering. What is beyond that? What is beyond?
Didn't you just say it?
But it's sort of unclear that what I said right now.
Oh.
Do you mean you want like concrete examples?
I
Because
just,
like you understand that you're gonna have a discomfort, that there's gonna be another discomfort after an environment, but do you want like sort of like specific, like
I just want to make sure that when we say the statement that like getting enlightenment is the purpose of life, that we also acknowledge the fact that there is still a lot of work afterwards. Is that the truth? Or
Well, of course, it's the truth. If you look at it from the perspective that you're looking at it from, then obviously, have I not said this ever? Do I not say this in every talk? I thought I said this. So yes, didn't I just say this for a week? So you have to, yes, of course there's work to be done. You go into society and you, as I say, bring everyone through the same process. But bring everyone through that same process means what you're saying. You create a different economic system, for example, so that we stop storing up all of these obstacles to the path. We want to express compassion, so we change our society for the benefit of all beings. So yes, that is what is to be done, of course, and it's hard, as you say. So I'll just first acknowledge that that's the case, but we have this recorded, right? What? This. What everything he just said. Right. So I think we should all study this very carefully. I think we should study it very carefully. Would you mind?
sure.
Great. So you said so many interesting things. You know, the concept of enlightenment, getting enlightenment. It's really important that we look at these underlying propositions and assumptions that each of your sentences contained. Because if you look at it that way, then there are lots of problems. And if there is anything that modern people are doing with this path, it is looking at the teachings from a deluded perspective, thus creating problems that they then solve and think they're helping. That's the main thing that modern people are doing with these ancient traditions. You look at the tradition from a deluded perspective, and then you think it says something that it never said. And even when you push them and say, can you show me where it says that? They can't. It's not in the text. But they still, but the Buddha meant it, I'm sure. And so I'm going to solve that problem. And they solve that problem in some way. Now, that isn't meaningless. It's helpful in a limited way. But we have to be very careful at how we are understanding this. Nonetheless, if we look at it from that perspective, then yes, you have to do work. You make organizations, and you create communities, and you produce pedagogies, and you come up with intensives, and you train leaders, and you do fundraising, and you give Sunday sits, and you produce national, nay, international collections of these organizations to collaborate in the production of a new and better society. And it's really hard. And while you're working on the legal documents at 11 o'clock at night, while everyone else is sitting, you think, how I wish I could just go back into the Zendo. Because this is really hard, as you say. Right? So from that perspective, yes, we do all that. And the only thing I'd say is that you're doing all that because we go back to the sense of self. If you think I am going to get enlightenment, then that's a problem in itself. Even if you have a certain experience of awakening, that isn't, from a certain perspective, not the one you're mentioning, but from a certain perspective, if you think I have had this experience but others haven't, then that's ego. Right?
I agree. I just want to make sure that we're approaching it without this mentality.
Yeah, so the mentality of we'll be selfish, we'll use the path for selfish ends, and we won't be of service or have an impact on the world, that is certainly something that I feel strongly about, and I'm glad you do too. Right, well, it's 8:15. Does that mean we have to finish at some point, right? That's the rule. But this is the last one, right? For this side, go away, more or less. So, how many questions are there? Important questions that must be asked. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, tough luck. Yes?
I want to go on threes. Oh, you're going to do all four?
I was thinking of it.
Take others first.
Yes?
I think mine's quick. When awareness is taken away from self, joy and compassion don't arise. Does that mean there's still attachment to self somewhere or a hindrance?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No.
But if it's not clear where or what it is.
It's probably not clear where it is. Yeah, you should investigate that. That's worth investigating. Yeah. It can be hard to find. It can be really hard to find it.
Is there any good direction to begin in, or is that just trial and error?
There are many different ways of working with it that depend on the situation. Many, hundreds, thousands of different, quote, directions to search in. I can't give a specific answer to all of those. I don't even know what a general principle would be. I don't even know what a general principle would be. Yeah. Yeah. So. What could I say? I guess the general principle would be make it as tangible, as ordinary as possible. Search for the attachment in the most tangible place you can find. Make it really tangible. And this again is about how are you asking the question? So you want to get to the point eventually in your practice where all of these issues are very, I don't know what to say other than tangible. They're tangible. So consider the state of mind where you would say to someone, so here I am. Ready? I'll do it. So I didn't make this happen, just a second. So where is this attachment? Okay? That won't work very well. Okay? Now consider this one. I'm going to make this one happen. So you just got here. Somebody just came here and they need some stuff. And so they say this. So where's the hardware store? That state of mind will work. And you want to do that. You want to say, so where's the attachment? You have to make it as tangible and as simple as that. The moment it goes into, the moment it gets at all abstract, you've lost it. So you need it to be completely ordinary. You're just looking for the attachment the same way that you'd be looking for the hardware store. Yes? Where is the hardware store? First of all, someone around here's got to know. So I'm just going to ask around until somebody tells me. And hopefully nobody does the thing that spiritual people do. They say, the hardware store. You know? I have seen the hardware store. Hopefully nobody does that. And if they don't know where it is, they just say, I don't know. I mean, a lot of you probably don't know where the hardware store is. There's one in Westfield. You might not know where it is. Do you know where it is? See? So you ask them where, and they say, I don't know. That's exactly what you want. And the same way you say, so where is this attachment to self? And if they don't know, they say, I don't know. But you hope somebody knows. And so you ask around until you say, where's the hardware store? Where is it? Westfield. Right. Where? Tell me where in Westfield. I mean, that's good. That's a helpful answer. I'm glad to know that. But where exactly in Westfield?
Highway 100.
Yeah, it's on 100. That's true. Tell me more.
In the middle of the town where all the other buildings are.
That's right. It's in the middle of town where all the other buildings are. Tell me more.
There are cars in front of it.
That's not you can't guarantee that one, but I appreciate your confidence in their customer base. But you can tell me more, right?
Across from the post office.
It is across the post office. Excellent. And so see how the whole conversation stays very tangible. It's not abstract. She's not saying
In the heart.
Exactly. In the heart. That's right. I'm not saying that. This is where the attachment is. I'll lay this out for you. Okay. This is Route 100 is not the hardware store, but it is how you get to the hardware store. So you could say, "Oh, good news. I need to tell you how to get there, and then you'll be able to get there." So you get there with your breath. Okay. Pay attention to your breath. That's what you do. That's Route 100. It's not the answer to the question, but you need it. So you take 100. Right? Of course, there are other ways to get there. There are lots of other ways to get there. Right? You go down here, you go onto somebody's land, you go through an orchard, you then go across, you go through his gate, and you go through, and there's a trail through the woods that I've taken, all the way to Lowell. It's great, the Lowell General Store. Well, you go there, you go a little further, and then there's this whole ATV track. And you can use that to get to Westfield too, if you want. It'll take you longer, be more pretty. Right? In the same way, you don't have to use your breath. There are lots of ways of getting to this answer, but all of the things I said were still completely tangible. Right? It's not this thing that spiritual types tend to do. Right? You know? That thing that make the whole thing so special it doesn't exist. I don't know. It's because we don't believe we can do it. It's because we think there isn't really a grocery store or a hardware store. And so the best thing you can do is draw one and be satisfied with that. And that's where so many of us are on the spiritual journey. We don't think there's really liberation. There isn't really bliss. There isn't really peace. There isn't really wisdom. They talk about it a lot to try to get us to do this for some inexplicable reason. Why? No. Nobody. None of these people are benefiting much. They all, but for some reason, they want me to sit still. I don't know why that benefits them at all, but somehow it does so. So it's a trick, but I don't want to think it's a trick. And so I'm going to trick myself into thinking it's not a trick by coming up with an idea about it that I theorize about and have opinions about and hold to and criticize people if they don't agree with them. And so it has to be just so tangible. I don't know what else to say than that. Not abstract. Where is the attachment to self? Where is it? I mean, come on. They say it's the source of all this suffering. So where is it? I want to do something about it. I'm trying to do something about it. I can't do anything about it if I don't know where it is. So where is it? Show me the attachment to self. That's the state of mind. It's got to be around here or else they're all lying. Okay, maybe they're lying, but what if they're not? Where is it? Maybe there's no hardware store, but there could be. Where is it? And you just keep searching. And then how do you search? There are many different methods, but the moment you let it become that, the moment it's a theory, then it's a hard road. Hard road ahead. All right, next.
Sorry, I'm worried about the solar retreat.
Me too. I know. I'm very worried about them. Yes. Thanks for being worried.
When I pay attention to flow,
Mm-hmm.
I find it disorients me and arises all over the place,
Yeah.
making me lose my sense and of space and time.
Yeah, right.
And I get very scared.
Definitely. Most people do.
Very fearful.
Absolutely.
I stop practicing.
Yeah, that's very, very common. And this is the local minimum. This is an excellent example of the local minimum phenomenon. So you have this sense. The ways that you know how to move around in self, I'm me, I'm us, I'm that, those ways you're not afraid. You can move around. But then you get to these places where you can't get through it. It's too much suffering. It tricks you. Makes you afraid, for example. And then the fear is unacceptable suffering, so you stop. So this is very common and is just what we're talking about here. You have attachment to some sort of a self that knows certain kinds of things. And if you keep going, then that identification will fall apart. It will be disproven. Does that make sense? And you're afraid of that. And why are you afraid of that? Because if you weren't afraid of it, you would have already done it. That's all. It's that simple. It's that simple. If you didn't have a wall of suffering there, you would have walked that way and discovered what's on the other side. Does that make sense?
No, but then why is the wall? I don't understand.
Yeah, but see, that's the difference. That's the point I'm making. It's the opposite direction. The wall is there, thus self. It's not that there is self, thus there's a wall. There's a wall. That's why you haven't walked that way. There is some kind of experience that you're not willing to experience. There's some kind of experience that you're not willing to not experience. That's why you haven't gone that way. That's why you're not free. So you have to. So you go there, you stay there, you experiment with it, you find that it's awful, and then you see that the thing that you needed to let go of in order to keep going is not yourself. And the thing that you had to go through in order to keep going that way is, or cannot destroy yourself. Okay? Yep.
If someone is visibly suffering in front of me, I can still be selfish, but it's like the karmic backlash, so to speak, is just like right, just like hits me in the face.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point.
Like that. This is a very good property.
It's a very good property,
And
but not the best.
when I think about like
Mm-hmm.
responsibility to the world,
Mm-hmm.
it only comes in terms of a very like
Exactly.
it's a very very feeble story. Even like I can read a book on existential risk and it can make me cry, and afterwards it like doesn't seem to affect my behavior at all.
That's exactly right.
I don't know that being here makes this worse, because like in the rest of the world you're still.
Well, don't go on too long. We have to finish up. Is there a specific question, or should I just answer the question I'm hearing?
Yeah, that one, the latter.
Okay. So yeah, this is extremely important. We have these senses, and we human beings have a really special relationship with the kind of experience you're discussing, and have empathy and often compassion under these circumstances. It's a big deal, but it's still limited to the senses. It is limited to the senses. So we have this sense of compassion, but it's limited to the senses. It's triggered by the information available to the senses. Very little information is available to the senses. The whole world, very little information available to the senses, but that's the part of all of the phenomena in the world that we live by. And so we try, this is exactly the thing that we were discussing with the hardware store. So the thing we try to do is come up with concepts about the objective, whatever that is, world. There's been a claim made that there's an objective world, so we'll go with that. So there is an objective world that we see with the senses. We come up with ideas about it, okay? The issue is that we all know perfectly well that these concepts are deeply untrustworthy. We all have seen things a certain way, learned one piece of information, and see it a completely different way within minutes. We've all had this experience, and in fact, we have it often. Yes? You say, should we go here or here? We should go here. Yeah, but they don't have such and such. Well, then let's go there. You have absolute conviction in your conceptual frame that this is right. Within minutes, seconds, you are completely on the other. You will argue with someone. You'll insult someone if they disagree with this view that you just came to after one, and then they say they're closed. Let's go there. So we all know how untrustworthy the concepts are. Now, that doesn't mean concepts are bad. That's just a characteristic. That's actually a reason that they're good. That's one of the reasons that they're so powerful, because you can construct them and deconstruct them so quickly. You don't have to change the whole world to find out what would happen. You make a model of it, and then you can play with the model. That's the main reason that human beings are so powerful. Okay? So obviously it's good in those ways. The issue is that we know it's untrustworthy. We know that it's limited and often incorrect. And so it has a kind of impact on us, but not the same kind of impact. All that said, the actual answer, like it or not, because it's a hard answer, is you have to go in the other direction. You can't come up with a model of the world created by the physical senses and then make a model of that in your conceptual frame. You actually have to go the other way to that which you do not experience with the senses. The experience we have from this location is self. We are located here, and we're seeing things in terms of these little organs, understood by this very, very recent apparatus. It's not well made. So we're working on it. So in being stuck in this, we are stuck in a kind of self, in a local, in a location, in a place, in a time. And in order to actually solve the problem and experience another kind of compassion that is even more striking and unavoidable than the one you were describing when someone's in front of you suffering, one that is even more quaking, even more shattering, even more, enlivening. We have to set aside the senses. And realize this thing we could call our own true nature. When you realize that in one moment you directly encounter every living thing. And are struck in that way, but now there's no sensory experience that can dissuade you from that. Are we there? Doesn't mean that thinking and concepts are bad. They're very helpful.